What happens when the lifeblood of a community turns into a fiery inferno? In the picturesque city of Bellingham, nestled between dense forests and the sparkling bay, two essential lifelines course through the heart of the community. Whatcom Creek, a haven for salmon and childhood adventures, and the Olympic Pipeline, vital for the region's mobility. Both are integral to daily life until they violently cross paths. It's a perfect summer's day in Whatcom Creek Park. Two young boys are enjoying nature and playing by the stream. However, in an instant, this town's peaceful existence erupts into a violent fireball, burning everything in its wake. But what or who triggered this vicious explosion? A steel pipeline, managed by Olympic, stretches from refineries in northern Washington to Portland, Oregon. It is an essential artery for fuel transportation and is remotely controlled from Renton. Here, computers monitor the flow of fuel, check for problems, and control the pressure to avoid accidents. But beneath the surface, it harbors flaws that will soon lead to a catastrophe. June 10th starts out like any other day for staff at the control center. Then, around 3:15 in the afternoon, one of the system's operators notices an error in the computer logs monitoring valves and gasoline flow in the pipeline. This was the first sign that something was wrong. But after double-checking, they believe everything is fine. While fuel is being delivered from the Cherry Point pumping station to the Tosco facility, controllers begin to reroute it to a terminal on Harbor Island in Seattle. A routine task that should be uneventful. Nearly 100 miles away in Bellingham, locals are savoring the warm June afternoon amidst the beauty and serenity of the park surrounding the Whatcom Creek Gorge, which runs directly through the heart of the city. It is the second last day of the school year. And among the creek's visitors, two 10-year-olds, Stephen Siorvis and Wade King, are playing near the banks of the river, a familiar place they feel safe. Back at the control center in Renton, things are less peaceful. At 3:18 p.m., operators start the transfer, but pressure begins to build in the pipeline upstream from the delivery point. The increase is initially thought to be normal due to routine fluctuations during fuel transfer. To manage this, the controllers activate a backup pump to relieve the pressure. However, the fuel transfer unexpectedly fails, sounding alarms and causing the computers to become unresponsive. With the operating system failing at this crucial moment, the situation quickly escalates. At 3:22 p.m., pumps start shutting down due to high pressure. The controllers, hampered by the unresponsive system, struggle to understand and manage the rapidly evolving situation. Just 6 minutes later, disaster strikes. The pipeline ruptures under the Whatcom Falls Park, releasing 237,000 gallons of gasoline, enough to fill 15,000 cars. Just a minute later, pressure drops to normal, but the pipeline shuts down between Cherry Point and Renton. Controllers, unaware of the rupture, are left with a seemingly malfunctioning system. The gasoline transfer from Cherry Point is suspended as crews assess the problematic situation. Believing they had resolved the issues, the controllers restart the transfer from Cherry Point. They have no clue that they are pumping even more gasoline into the rupture. For the next 40 minutes, gasoline spews into the creek, creating an increasingly dangerous situation. Before a recent high school graduate leaves for the creek, he writes his parents a note to tell them where he will be. Liam Wood is fly fishing at his favorite spot, not far from the two young boys. It will be the last note he ever writes. With each passing minute, the danger grows, invisible to those who can prevent it. Nearly an hour after the rupture, the leak detection software finally sounds an alarm, alerting controllers to the serious problem. As instructions are given to start another pump, a company employee calls 911 from the bridge that crosses the creek, reporting gasoline fumes. Only then does the control room in Renton become aware of the rupture in the line.
911, yes, I'd like to report an explosion. A big smoke.
The next few minutes see a flurry of activity. pipeline controllers begin closing valves to isolate the rupture. A minute later, police and fire crews start closing roads around the creek and calling in a hazardous materials team to investigate. The gasoline continues to flow from the rupture site near the water treatment plant, spreading downstream and saturating the water. The creek's clear water turns milky white, contaminated by the toxic fuel. Vapors begin to rise from the water, creating a heavy, choking fume that hangs over the creek and surrounding area.
Couldn't believe what I was seeing. I mean, it was literally just free-flowing gasoline, and the vapors went as high as you could see. It just blurred the whole landscape behind the creek.
Unaware of the danger approaching, Liam carries on fishing. The gasoline vapors, heavier than air, begin to settle into the lower areas of the park, including the canyon where Liam is. As the odors grow stronger, they overwhelm him. Trapped by the canyon walls, he can't escape the suffocating fumes. Liam loses consciousness, falls into the creek, and drowns. His body would only be identified in the early hours of the next morning.
Around 2:30 in the morning, we heard steps on the porch, and, well, at first I thought it was him, and it was the police. So they told us then.
The river has become hazardous as gasoline floats on the surface, creating an explosive layer that extends downstream. Almost 90 minutes after the rupture, the severity of the situation is becoming clear. A 911 dispatcher calls Olympic's emergency number to inquire about the leak's origin. They are told the company knows the situation and that the pipeline has been shut down. Soon after, radio stations start broadcasting emergency messages, urging people to stay away from the creek. Evacuations start for areas within 200 feet of the creek. The danger is imminent, but no one knows just how close they are to catastrophe. Pipeline controllers finally call 911 to report a possible release of product into Whatcom Creek. This would soon prove to be a terrible understatement. As gasoline continues to flow downstream, the slightest spark could trigger an inferno. Meanwhile, the two friends, Wade and Stephen, have found an old discarded cigarette lighter. Their curiosity gets the better of them, and they start playing with it. Unaware of the buildup of fumes and leaked gasoline around them, the boys flick it and it instantly sparks, igniting the vapors with a deafening boom. Instinctively, the two jump into the stream to try to save themselves, but are badly burnt. The explosion sends a massive fireball reaching an estimated 2,000 degrees Fahrenheit, roaring down the creek to Interstate 5, downtown. The river of fire spreads rapidly, extending approximately 1.5 miles along the stream. The impact is felt across Bellingham. Flames engulf the creek, and a billowing black cloud of smoke rises 30,000 feet into the air. It's visible for miles. The two young boys are found by neighbors standing in shock and pain, their clothes burned away by the intense heat. By 6:30 p.m., firefighters have brought the major fires under control. The skyline starts clearing within the hour. Both boys were airlifted to a hospital in Seattle, but the prognosis wasn't looking good. As the flames subsided, the cause of the disaster was investigated. The NTSB found that the explosion wasn't just a one-off event, but a series of human errors, oversights, and systemic failures spanning several years. It all started in 1994 during upgrades to the city's water treatment plant, when contractors accidentally struck the nearby pipeline with heavy machinery. The dent seemed minor at the time, and because of poor inspections by Olympic, it went unnoticed. Fast forward to the late 90s, when the company did some inline inspections that should have caught the damage from the earlier excavation, but they botched the evaluation and decided not to dig up and check the damaged section. Just before the disaster, the company was launching a nearby facility, which only added to more problems. The valve that stops flow in the pipeline kept closing unexpectedly. This caused problems with pressure and operations. But even though it kept happening, they did nothing. Despite these obvious issues, they turned a blind eye, until the rupture. And after counting all the losses, the total toll of the disaster was just devastating. The creek's ecosystem was decimated by a fire that burned 26 acres, charred the soil, and vaporized the water. All aquatic life downstream of the rupture site was killed, including more than 100,000 fish, about 3,000 birds and small mammals, otters, beavers, and red-tailed hawks also died. The explosion destroyed Bellingham's water treatment plant and caused $58 million in damages to surrounding properties. Sadly, the boys didn't survive. Wade died in the early hours on the day after the disaster, and Stephen passed away shortly after.
My son loved baseball, and I didn't want him to suffer. So I told him there's a baseball game going on in heaven, and they needed a left-handed hitting catcher.
In a twist of fate, the boys became unwitting heroes.
Something was going to cause those fumes to erupt into flame. And the fact that it was isolated to a largely unoccupied area resulted in far less, I think, human damage. The impact could have been much more devastating had that plume of gases continued all the way down into Bellingham Bay.
Remarkably, the massive explosion and fire resulted in no further loss of life, with only a few injuries reported. It was clear that the incident was preventable at multiple points, and there would be significant legal consequences. In a historic move, 2 Olympic employees were jailed for their involvement. The company was also charged with over $100 million in fines and costs. Additionally, the families of the 2 boys who died received $75 million in a wrongful death lawsuit. At the same time, Liam's family settled a suit for an undisclosed amount. The tragedy prompted changes in safety regulations and the establishment of the Pipeline Safety Trust. After the explosion, Olympic stopped its operations. The line remained shut down for 20 months, marking the most extended pipeline closure after an incident in U.S. history. But with over 300,000 miles of liquid fuel lines crisscrossing America and a legacy of corporate negligence and human error, the question isn't if such an incident will happen again, but when. Watch this episode next if you found this video interesting. Please add a like and leave a comment if you want to support the channel.